So can I invite each of our panellists up to these very fine chairs? And then we're going to spend about 20 minutes. We're running about 10 or 12 minutes behind schedule, but we've got plenty of time. The wine reception will continue until 7:30. So this, at the last event, was a very useful and enjoyable aspect. And what we're going to do is both take questions from the audience and or from Slido. Okay, so I'm going to just kick off, but before I move to Slido, I wouldn't mind just seeing if anyone in the audience has got a burning question to ask. Everyone want to kick one off before we move to Slido? Given you're real people and you exist in the room? Yes. There's one here. Ella, have you got?
Thank you. My question's to Kate. I think that's a brilliant idea, and it's something that we've been kind of grappling with within our own labs and across multi-labs. And I basically just had a question about how you then go about publishing that. So one of the questions I had was that if you've got a power analysis that says you need, say, 200, and your student can only collect 100 in the time, they need to analyse that data, write it up for their dissertation, and then you collect more data to then publish it. Would you have to control for data peaking in the fact that you've already checked what they've got and you know you're going to continue that data collection?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it has been and I think this speaks to the point of, you know, us revolutionaries having all these ideals, but actually it's very hard doing this sort of stuff in practice because you're trying to align several not always compatible processes. So the students we had to stop data collection so that they could do their dissertations. But I would say that the advantage of what we've done so far is that there would be no way that we could have then individually published those student projects because our protocol is pre-registered. So we made the decision, and in fact, I was of the opinion that we should write up what we got at that point and move on, but actually others were keen to carry on data collection because we've put so much effort into it, and why not finish the study? But we will be controlling we'll have to adjust our alpha.
Okay, yeah. Perfect, thank you.
EJ.
No problem for Bayesians, of course, this at all.
And in fact, the one we're running at the moment this year is now Bayesian, so we're fine. 2018.
Okay, I'm going to move just going to be one question. I'll come back to the audience, but the hottest question on the Slido list, I think, is directed at Andy initially, at least. So it says, is an independent analyst really independent if they're involved in study design and will be an author? Don't they have vested interest in publishable results? Andy?
Maybe.
I was kind of hoping for a little bit more.
I don't know, I guess speaking from personal experience, no. Because I don't ever feel, when I'm dealing with someone else's data, I don't ever feel any kind of attachment to what's going on beyond. Like, I really enjoy sitting in a room on my own with numbers. But beyond that, I don't care.
Okay.
But I'm in, I guess, the privileged position where my head of school doesn't like me anyway. And so it doesn't matter if I don't publish a lot.
Can I remind you that this has been recorded for YouTube? But nonetheless, we'll accept
That reminder would have been really helpful, like
Indeed.
2 minutes ago.
Stop. Susan, you want to come in? Go for it.
I have a follow-up question, which is, do we have enough psychologically oriented statistical experts to go around? Because if each of us in the room should get a collaborator who's not just a random statistician who doesn't care about our ideas and theories, but somebody who might actually think they're reasonable.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic question. So I, at a different talk a couple of weeks ago, got asked a similar question about how we would implement this, and it would involve a massive cultural shift, and there'd have to be people trained to be methodologists where that was their primary focus. So they, I think there's a few issues here. So I don't know him personally, but I'm pretty sure if Daniel is it Larkins or Lakins? Larkins. I'm pretty sure if he was here, he would make some comment about you go to see the statistician and he or she tells you what you want to know. And I think there's a massive potential communication problem. So we need statisticians who have sort of psychological background so they can understand what you care about in your theory and in your hypotheses, and not just be, you know, a number monkey who doesn't really understand psychology. There needs to be a good line of communication. So for that to work, you would need people trained and have a career path and be valued as equals in the process who are methodologically trained. I mean, you're absolutely right. As it stands now, no, there are not enough people.
Okay, good point, Andy and Susan.
Well,
EJ.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that in our department, our psychological methods group actually has a methodology shop for faculty. So there's faculty from the methodology unit who have particular hours that they're in operation, and grad students and professors can make an appointment and show up and get statistical advice. Of course, if you're an author and you're involved in doing experiments, etc., that could be a full-time job, but giving statistical advice is not necessarily a full-time job. So a good methodologist could handle many projects.
I mean, it's interesting. Daniel, as an example, his blog is 20% statistician, or whatever it's called, kind of speaks to that issue. I want to go back to the audience and let other panelists come in. So other people had their hands up there. There's someone over here. Yes, at the back.
Can we go back to EJ's comment about this is no problem for Bayesians? Because if I'm interpreting it correctly, the replication and reproducibility is for null hypothesis significance testing alone and doesn't seem to address the Bayesian kind of population of researchers. Should we be having the same concerns? Should we be taking the same steps? I'm doing a Bayesian analysis and I know that I'm not necessarily powered enough now because I've run out of time.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Richard would say. I believe that of all the questionable research practices, the data peaking optional stopping one is probably the only one that needn't bother Bayesian. Most other questionable research practices are about hiding particular things or cherry picking, and every statistical method any statistical method would have a problem with that. But what I like about the Bayesian approach, even when you're underpowered, right, it could still be that you have an informative result. Right? It doesn't, on average, your outcome won't be very diagnostic, but that doesn't mean that your specific data set is not diagnostic. Right? So by adopting the Bayesian framework, you can focus on the diagnosticity of the data that you have actually obtained, not some kind of average over a hypothetical sample space of experiments that you could have, experimental outcomes that you could have gotten but didn't.
Richard, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so let me say that it's not entirely accurate to say that it doesn't affect Bayesians. It doesn't affect the Bayesian inference. Of course, it will affect any sort of frequentist inference that you would like to make about those data. And to the extent that people in psychology have a variety of intuitions about what statistical evidence means, you might want to consider both frequentist and Bayesian ways of thinking about the evidence. So optional stopping may be something that you would want to account for in reporting a frequentist analysis alongside a Bayesian analysis. That's what I would say about that.
Okay. Anyone else in the audience wants to come in? Yeah, John here.
Hi. It's a kind of more general question because various people have highlighted conversations taking place in a broader media than just within the psychological literature. So you've looked at magazine articles and so on. And so looking at it, or trying to look at it from an outside perspective, one would get the impression that looking in, that psychology is in a state of some crisis on account of these issues. Given as we have some potential solutions, what are the steps that we should perhaps take on a public-facing basis to try and convince people that progress is coming?
Okay. Who would like to take from the panel? I mean, I think I tried to do a pretty good job that we are moving forward in quite a number of ways, actually. But others may want to comment. Susan?
There's a communication researcher called Kathleen Hall Jameson at the University of Pennsylvania who is studying the narrative about science, which she says is threatening to be science is broken, right? Which fits what you're saying. But she's arguing that it should be more science is discovery, and with discovery and confirmation and disconfirmation, and that's part of the normal process. And that what we're doing is improving the science, and that we can make a new narrative that's more constructive, and I personally think more true.
Chris, would you like to come in, particularly with more independent eyes, independent in one way, but not in another, but...
Yeah. I don't have much to add, but I think it's true that doing research and doing science is an uncertain business, right? I don't think anybody could disagree with that. But I don't think that's well understood outside of groups like this. So I think one of the things that we could do is to continue to promote understanding of the lack of certainty in what it is that science is. It's a sort of a messy business. So that's one thing. Throughout several of the presentations today, people have talked about transparency in various guises. And perhaps that's one of the steps that all of us involved in doing science and communicating it could take, which would be helpful. And I'm not just talking about publishing data and materials, making that sort of thing available alongside journal articles or even preprints, just articles, not necessarily journal articles. I'm talking about transparency from journals as well. How do journals work, right? If people really knew how a journal worked, how it made its decisions, then that would be, from my point of view, a good addition of transparency. Practically, that means things like peer review. How does making peer review transparent doesn't mean having every peer review report signed, although you could do that. But perhaps the peer review conversation through the various revisions throughout an article could be made transparent, and that would both reward the peer reviewers for that valuable work, whether they're methodologists or others. It would add quality content around the journal article, and it would demonstrate that transparency and that sort of trustworthiness to the people reading the content, researchers or people looking in from outside, like you suggested.
Okay. I'm just going to go back to Slido because there's a couple of comments. First of all, a number of people have asked whether or not the slides and the talks will be available afterwards. So yes, they will be. So on the BPS YouTube channel, and or on the website linked to the event, we will have all the slides there freely downloadable, and also Andy will be losing his job soon when we place them on YouTube. Each of the presentations, you'll be able to go to each talk individually. So there's a broad question again on Slido, which I'd be interested in the panel members' views, which is, someone has asked, how can the incentives that contribute to the crisis be changed? We've talked about some of them already. But in a nutshell, can everyone give me a very succinct, I use the word succinct, response, starting here with Susan? What can be changed? Or what's most important to change?
Can I pass?
Yeah. Richard?
Oh, that means me. Okay. So I mentioned in my talk that I think the slow science movement and the less publication pressure and more large-scale replications. I want to say, let me back off the word replication per se. More large-scale exploration of phenomena would be really important. I don't know if that's succinct. But
that is succinct. Great, thanks. Kate?
I think funders have a major role to play in this, and they are moving on this already. But I think the example set by the NIHR is really wonderful, where for their very large-scale studies, they make it mandatory for their fundees to publish their results. And because that whole process is now a legal contract, no research that's published by them doesn't end up getting published eventually. That was a bit of a convoluted way to finish that sentence, so I'll pass over.
Andy?
I actually thought your talk was pretty good at answering this. Sorry if that sounds a bit
That's lazy.
crawly. Well, it's just, you know, at the moment, a lot of the driver is at the individual level, and I kind of think it needs to go the other way. So, I mean, like Kate's saying, funding, and also institutional reward for collaboration rather than individual efforts. So, for example, you know, not just singing the praises of a PI on the grant, but the team that gets the grant, those sorts of things.
That's great, Andy, I agree. Chris, any?
Right, concise. It's terrifying when someone says be concise.
And means it.
Yeah, he does. Okay, so rock stars and orchestras, right? Taylor Swift, rock star, kind of. Orchestras, the London Symphony Orchestra, pick your orchestra. Our way of thinking about research quality is for rock stars, right? There were 6 Nobel Prizes last year. There were 821 research papers published in Nature. Nature has an impact factor of 40 point, I don't even know what, 40.3 digits. Don't know what they are. Right, that's for Taylor Swift, right? That's for rock stars. That's okay. But most of what research is done by orchestras, I would argue. Do you like the metaphor there? So in Scopus, there were 1.8 million articles, research articles published last year, compared with the 821 in Nature Research, right? 1.8 million. There are about 17 million researchers and postdocs on the planet, all right? And I don't know what the normal number of sites an individual article gets, but I bet it's between 0 and 1. Right? It's a very different world for the orchestra, but that's what makes research happen. Many people, you know, playing a fiddle, blowing a flute, timpani, you know, all of that stuff. So I think we need a new thing to aspire to. Nobel Prize is fine, impact factor super, go for it. But we need something else to aspire to, and there's a gap there. I don't know what it is that we can aspire to, but we need to aspire, find out what that is, and aspire to that. There you go.
Thanks for that, Chris. E.J.?
Yeah, I think outcome independent publication and perhaps Chris Chambers' registered report format.
Okay. Yes, Susan, yeah, please.
So one of the things I didn't show you was people's impressions of scientists. Compared to other professions, our distinctive attribute is curiosity. And so I think our reputation as being people who are driven by curiosity. You know, I could be right, I could be wrong, but let me assess it as carefully as I can. And that's part of the sort of science as discovery narrative. So I think that's what we have to reinforce.
Okay, excellent. And a couple of minutes for just some questions from the audience. Yeah, go for it. Can we just pass the mic there, please? Just here.
Hi, this has just come up. I suppose it's aimed at Kate, but also related to what Chris just said about Rockstar versus the audience. You said that your students would all get put on the paper that eventually got published. That could be upwards of like maybe 10, 12 students. Who gets to be first author and who gets to put that on their CV, and should that even matter? I suppose Chris Chambers' book, it says there should be another way around this, but who gets to be the rock star in that particular way?
So again, I think we look at genetic epidemiology as a kind of trailblazer for this because they've had such large authorship lists. They've had to come up with guidelines or kind of rules or justifications for how they determine who goes where on a paper. And so I think whoever takes ownership of writing the paper up, actually drafting the manuscript, would be first, and then whomever kind of was overall leading on it. So it might be that that project was more related to Christopher Chambers and Natalia Lawrence's work, so I'll let them fight over senior author. But the students would then be listed. But I think what really helps, probably alphabetically, but I think what really helps with this is having author contribution statements. So making it really clear, having a very detailed author contribution statement showing exactly what each person has done to the work and also in the write-up of the manuscript. And that way, when people are employing these students in the future, they can look at that and see exactly what their role was within that paper, and they can also use that as evidence during their interviews and so on. But I think that's probably the way forward. But in terms of how we think about the ref process and first, last and whatever, I think there's some work to be done about the ref process around how we value contributions to papers.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that general point? No? Okay. Time for maybe one final question. Yeah. Go on, Roger.
So that leads me to ask, if we could get rid of competitiveness in science and persuade those who lead it to adopt a cooperative model of working, how much of this would go away?
Very good question. Who would like to take, that's a challenging one, so who would like to take that first? Susan?
I've had a couple or three maybe good experiences with adversarial collaboration. It's really hard because you have to respect each other. But if you can assume that the other person really wants to know the answer, that their work is curiosity-driven and honest, I feel like we moved science forward a little bit on these collaborations. So, you know, it's still competitive because the person I'm working with wants to be right, or more right than me. Mm-hmm. But if we trust each other and are open with each other about what we're doing, it seems like progress can be made.
Great. Richard?
Yeah, so I've had some adversarial collaboration experience, and I think a mix, the nice thing about that is you get a mix of competitive and cooperative behavior within the same project, right? And it turned out for this particular project that I'm thinking of, I was wrong, and that was okay. And we ended up publishing a paper, and now I have a story to tell. But we went through multiple iterations of several experiments, and we finally settled on one after an extended adversarial collaboration, and it ended up being published, and it was a good paper, and it replicates, which is important. But yeah, it was the experience of an adversarial collaboration had elements of both, and I think those are both valuable in the scientific process, at least in my experience.
Okay. Anybody, one final comment in regards to that question?
I've got a comment on collaboration and competition at the moment. Can make collaboration quite hard, so we're working on a wider collaborative project, and it's been really tense at times between having access to the data and in the spirit of collaboration, because I think the other party were worried that if they shared too much of their data and their research proposals and so on, then they might be giving away their research ideas, but then they also wanted to collaborate on this specific piece of work. So I think if we could take away that fear of being kind of pipped to the post or having your ideas stolen, then it would actually really facilitate collaboration, which sometimes is undermined by this kind of slightly tense. It's a bit like the porcupines mating thing, right? You're collaborating, but you could also be competitors, so it's like, oh, how much do I want to give away? But yeah, maybe me. Anyway, is that a pretty wide...
They are the two words you'll take away from today. Porcupine mating is a thing. So on that brilliant note, I think it'd be appropriate to thank our panel. So we have had, I think, excellent presentations all day. I hope you've enjoyed it. But before we thank the panel, I would also extend my thanks to Lisa Morris and Coulthard. Lisa, can you stand up, though you hate to do that? Lisa made a lot of today happen, which has been fantastic, as other members of her team. Can we also thank Wiley? Wiley are sponsoring what you're waiting for, which is wine. So we thank Wiley for that. And also we thank the British Psychological Society, the Association of Heads of Psychology Departments, and the Experimental Psychology Society also. It is not an inexpensive endeavour hosting an afternoon at the Royal Society, and to make it free as well. So I hope that you will agree we've had a tremendous days of discussion. There is a legacy for this event such that all talks, slides, Slido will all be available online later, and you will be able to relive the experience many, many, many times. So thank you all, and we will see you over wine very soon.